My name is Matt Grajewski, probably better known as for being one of three brothers, along with Eric and Mark. I am a full-time dad, part-time employee for Renzetti, and sell some flies on the side. How did I get started in fly fishing? Well, I grew up in a fishing and hunting family, and my dad exposed us to all sorts of fishing techniques. So probably my first memory of fly fishing is fishing for bluegills with rubber spiders. And I remember being kids and doing that and watching my dad when we were younger until he allowed us to do it, because we used to pile 6 of us in a canoe. And so he certainly didn't trust us in the beginning. As we got older, he let us cast the rod and still have fun doing it. Rubber spiders for bluegills, yeah, that's how I started and still doing it today. How did I learn about big streamers? It's kind of a funny question, especially with that guy sitting right there, with Kelly sitting over there. So my parents bought a cabin in 1985 near Mayo, Michigan in the Asable River, and I remember being a kid just wade fishing. What we used to do is throw rapalas during the day and then wait for hatches or spinner falls in the evening and then fish for those. And I remember we saw Kelly going by one day throwing what we thought was huge at the time, which was just I think it was probably a marabou muddler. I can tell you the exact spot. My younger brother Mark and I were on the river, and Kelly used to have an aluminum drift boat. Maybe he still does. And you didn't see a lot of drift boats, and so we saw them coming down. They were on the opposite side of the river, and they were throwing, you know, it looked like a big yellow fly. Still remember it. And they caught a fish. It was probably like 18 inches, and we were like, we're throwing rapalas because, you know, you couldn't really get away from the bank. You couldn't. Big streamers wasn't a really well-known thing. I can't even say. It was pre-95. Right. It could have been somewhere between 92, 95. I have no idea how long they had been doing it. But remember that, and we were like, well, you know, we need to do that. Like that looks more fun, you know? And it led to us getting a boat. It led to, you know, tying flies. I even think, if I remember right, I think my older brother Eric bought Kelly and Bob's book, and so we could look at the patterns and try to tie them. And that was the start of it. And it just took off, like, for us. But it was, I can still picture that like it's happening right now. All right, what haunts me about streamer fishing? I think if you streamer fish and it, like I said, like it's once, if you do it and you know it's for you, things will just automatically haunt you. It could be a specific fish that you missed or you lost. It could be an opportunity that you feel like you missed because there was ideal conditions, you didn't go. It could be that it's a specific fly, something about it is not quite doing what you want, and so it's just on your brain all the time. And I think, but ultimately, it is, for me, what is the constant draw is seeing a fish lose its mind. And there are numerous ways to be more successful at streamer fishing, and I've tried a lot of them, but ultimately I would rather catch less fish if I can see a fish act in a way where it completely loses control. Just total predator instincts, loses control, makes a bad decision. It's like, that's always the thought in my head, is like, get that fish to make a bad decision. One tip for a newer streamer fisherman, the word that jumps out to me is persistence. Like, is don't give up. It's not, there are times where guys could go into a certain body of water and the first time they go in there it happens and it happens right away. But that shouldn't be the expectation. The expectation should be the grind, and it should just be persistent. Like, this isn't unique to me, but I always think of or tell other people, like, fish your fly like the fish is there every cast. Every time you move it, even if you can see your fly and you don't see a fish, imagine there could be a fish underneath it just out of sight. And the next strip it could eat it. And so it's just like that persistence of fishing, like it could happen at any moment, is going to pay off big time. Because so many times there's long days of nothing happening, and it does happen out of nowhere. And those are, kind of going back to the question before, that will haunt you if you let your guard down. And it finally happens, because streamer fishing really should be, well, anyone can do it however they want. How I like to do it is, and a lot of other guys, is you're fishing for one fish. And so that one fish could come at any time. It could be the first fish of the day, it could be the 30th fish of the day, it could be beginning of the day, it could be last couple of casts or last cast of the day. And people like to say they always bite when you're not expecting, but if you're always expecting, it's hard to be caught off guard. It's almost, you know, like you said, it is hard. It's hard to pick one thing, but if there are guys I know that are persistent and they fish hard and you're going to get discouraged at some point, but mix in some catching. Like streamer fishing isn't catching, it's fishing. So it's never a terrible thing to mix in some fishing, whether it's for a different species or fish for trout in a different way. There doesn't have to be, there's this weird perception in fly fishing that the technique you pick is better than other techniques, whether it's swinging flies, whether it's streamer fishing, whether it's dry fly fishing, whatever it is, people have a tendency to pick and hone in on something, and then other techniques like aren't as worthy. Like, don't do that. You're missing out on a lot. You're missing out on feedback in terms of like fish behavior. You can learn a big trout where it sets up to feed on dries. You can learn where it typically sits in the evening. And if there's no bugs and it doesn't rise, it'll still sometimes move into some of those evening haunts to feed on fish. So it's just don't get honed in, don't get stuck on one retrieve, one fly color, one fly action. So outside of persistence, I would say, like, don't get narrow-minded. Like, keep your mind open, whether it's just in streamer fishing, whether it's other techniques, and mixing it up. Because if you do switch a technique and go back to the streamer grind, sometimes that helps people. Kind of gets your mind right, kind of refreshes you to go after it for the rest of the day. So be persistent, don't get down a rabbit hole and get narrow-minded. And I think both of those things will help you, and figure out what it is for you. It's hard to tell someone, here's what will keep you focused, or here's what'll work when you're getting down, and it's not the case. You gotta figure it out for yourself and figure out what your grind is. And when you figure out what your grind is and you find the enjoyable aspects of the grind, like that becomes weirdly, just weirdly enjoyable, to where you can go a fishless day and at the end you don't feel beaten or down or like you had a fishless day. If you find a way to enjoy the grind, then all of the fish are bonus, and then it's like a good day, like almost no matter what. Favorite streamer, another one of those just one tip questions, which I think if you ask any streamer guy to pick one streamer and he automatically can and he's all over it, I think it, not in a bad way, but it tells you something about them as a streamer fisherman, because it's weather conditions, water conditions, time of year, all can call for different things. But if I had to pick one, if I had to fish, I would fish a fly for fish that are going to eat other fish. It would be the yard sail for me, and that's probably a little gimmicky to pick one of my own things, but I'll explain why. One, I can tie it effectively from like 2 inches up to 12. Like, that's for a wide range of species, so I can cover different conditions, and I know it will get eaten. But streamer fishing isn't just about the ultimate results in catching fish for me. There's like an emotional connection to it, and certain things led up to me tying the yard sail, which was one of those things that I also, like, for me, I feel like was uniquely mine. So there's a emotional connection to it there, but also the process of starting and working on other flies and getting those flies to swim in a certain way, that was what ultimately led me to tying the yard sail and getting it to swim the way that it does. And that whole process, that whole journey, is part of why it's one of my favorites. And then you add the effectiveness on top of there, and I think, again, if gun to head, have to pick one, that's what I'd pick. First fly I ever tied would be a woolly bugger, I would guess, and that's probably a pretty standard one. Like, you learn tying a tail, tying a body, like Palmer hackle. Like, I think it's the technique of tying it. It's either that or pheasant tail, where the first ones that I ever remember tying my own, at least to where like I was sitting down and I'm like, I'm gonna tie a fly. Not like some stuff we did when we were a kid, which was lashing stuff to a hook without really any purpose. But I would say woolly bugger and or pheasant tail, and they could have been around the same time. But the woolly bugger was the first one I remember tying and fishing, and was like kind of like the holy shit, this works, even though I made it type of a thing. Favorite material? I'd have to say bucktail for numerous reasons. The castability of bucktail with large flies, the durability, the versatility of it in terms of different hairs depending on where you pulled it off of the tail. And for me, predominantly musky fishing, large fly that is castable, that is durable, and is going to allow for the action I want. So I can tie, overwhelmingly when people see my stuff in person, a lot of times the first thing is it's a lot more sparse than I would have thought, or that it comes across in the pictures, and that's by design. Bucktail allows you to get profile with less material. So something that's easy to struggle with in streamer tying, I would say is probably proportions. Like the right amount of material for the profile and action you want with the fly can be tough because it varies so much with material. So figuring out the material you want to use, if that's going to give you the profile and action you want, and then figuring out the right amount of material because they're so different. You need more marabou than you do bucktail, for example. And one thing I always try to tell people is, if asking me for one tip, even though we already did that question, although I think that was fishing, not tying, this still counts, is that get the profile and action with the least amount of material. So, and again, that can be very based on material, but too many times it's easy to put too much material, which could make the fly too buoyant, may soak up too much energy so the fly can't really kick or swim. Too little material and it collapses in the water depending on the type of material. So the trick is figuring out what are the correct proportions for the material, and really the only way to do it is by trying it. Future streamer fishing. I think streamer fishing's been on a path for a little bit now where it is trying to in a sense mimic lures. I say this all the time, like the best fly fishermen that I know personally either used to do some forms of gear fishing or still do. You get so much more feedback, and to throw something like a glider, swim bait, a twitch bait, and watch how fish react to that, and then be able to try to take how can I mimic that with the fly, allows a certain process that you might not come to without it. Maybe you would, but I think trying to mimic that, and you see that in the materials that exist and that are probably going to exist. But I also see, I guess, kind of a deeper thought behind that question of where streamer fishing is going is fly fishing in general, and that I think as guys will dabble in other forms of fishing a little bit more and not be apologetic about it. I'm 40 years old, so there was definitely a time period in my fly fishing career where there was a lot of, I caught this fish, but I caught it on a Rapala, and it feels apologetic, or it was somehow a different type of accomplishment. But I think more guys are starting to be okay with that, because as streamer fishing, that line starts to blur with lure fishing. I don't think that, hopefully people aren't as apologetic about it, because there's nothing wrong with it. Maybe that's blasphemous to say, I don't know, or don't care. I certainly see those lines between lure fishing and fly fishing getting closer, and I do feel that we'll get into a certain place where it won't be so special that you fly fish or just fly fish. That it's just fishing, and fly fishing is just another way to fish.